Welcome to this week's weekly market roundup, brought to you by Nebraska Soybean Farmers and their checkoff. I am Steve White, and this week we're excited to have Mike Zuzolo joining us. Mike, first of all, I just want to get just a quick takeaway as you look at the last 7 days in the trade. What kind of jumps out to you as the headline of the week?
Yeah, good to be with you, Steve. I guess we finally saw the global wheat trade and the weather in the wheat market finally take hold by the futures market. We'd been talking about this for, several weeks as far as what was going on in the hard red wheat belt here in this country. But there's also been a lot going on in the Black Sea wheat belt, especially the question mark about Russia and their freezes and their frosts that they had a couple months ago, and not knowing what that's going to do for their production potential as far as diminishing it. I think even more so and more important that the market's been probably watching but not wanting to trade until this week was the Central Plains of China and their wheat belt having a pretty significant drought. And I put that significant there, meaning it's probably one of the worst in about 10 years as it stands right now. And even the central government of China is talking about it and trying to address it. So it was nice to see that finally take hold, get some premium put back in the wheat. That helped the other commodities as well. And so we, as a conclusion to Friday's trade, even with some tariff news knocking us back a little bit and some hard red wheat weather looking maybe a little rainier early next week in some dry areas of Kansas and Nebraska, we still pulled together a second week in a row higher close in the corn, beans, soft red wheat as we went into the holiday 3-day weekend.
Well, that's just a tease of where we're going to go with things. We're going to take a moment now to pause for a spot from the Nebraska Soybean Farmers and their checkoff.
It may be small, but this little bean fuels a lot of power. It powers a food industry as a top source of protein. It's a fuel that powers diesel engines with fewer emissions. It powers a state economy and bottom lines. And it powers the rest of the world as a top Nebraska export. Yeah, it may be small, but we're finding more ways for this little bean to power Nebraska.
Welcome back to the weekly market roundup. I am Steve White, joined by Mike Zuzolo. We mentioned it, Mike, just a moment ago, but you teased us a little bit. Tariffs. We've been talking so much that's driving so many headlines that are driving markets the last couple of months. But on Friday, before the holiday weekend, the president coming out and saying another tariff potential, this time with the EU. What might we be looking at that direction?
I think it could have been a lot worse than where we ended on Friday's close, Steve. I think that's definitely, in my mind, due to a couple of interviews that the Secretary of Treasury held, one with Fox, one with Bloomberg. And he's kind of the central guy in the tariff policy that President Trump is utilizing to be his spokesperson. And so what he says carries a lot of weight in the markets. And so while the EU news was negative, the stock market went down. I think Secretary of Treasury Bessent's comments about Asian talks and policy, tariff policy negotiations going well, and that a potential short-term agreement with India could be in the offing before the 90 days is up. I think that was especially a big noteworthy piece of the puzzle when it comes to the biofuels, especially. We in the trade are really nervous about the policy when it comes to sustainable aviation fuel and biodiesel in particular, to a lesser degree ethanol. But we see these 2% swings in soybean oil market futures almost on a daily basis right now between good news, good rumors, and bad news and bad rumors.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be the case. I talked to Senator Ricketts about that actually earlier this week. So we'll keep tracking where things head on that one. You mentioned it earlier as we kick things off, but a wheat rally, some drought talk. Sometimes we think about drought. Certainly we think of our own backyard, but there's drought internationally. And how is that kind of influencing how things are moving?
Yeah, that's a great question, because once we come back from the holiday, we really do kind of start the weather market in the Northern Hemisphere properly, because that's our first big holiday of the summer that we're going into. I would frame it this way, Steve. Overall, the Western Corn Belt rains here in the States really did a lot to put the bull back into the pen when it came to a weather potential rally led by the corn and beans. And so that makes me feel like that wheat is still kind of the driving force in the weather market rally when we come back from the holiday. And that is because it's not just about the United States. It's also about the Black Sea and China. And we also have had some really big flooding issues we don't know much about yet in New South Wales, Australia. They're planting their wheat crop right now. So that's going to be another thing to be watching, as is the flooding in Argentina. We've really not put that to bed. And that's been, about a week ago that happened with those extra heavy rains, as they get about 2/3 harvested in beans as of this week and about 40% harvested in corn. But when I look at it in its totality, I still see wheat as the main weather driver when it comes to upside.
Sure. And we talked about it, but right here on the Great Plains, it's been awfully dry. Had we not picked up some moisture across Kansas, Nebraska, the Dakotas the last couple of days, we probably could have seen the markets impacted by that, couldn't we?
I do think that. I really wouldn't have been surprised to see the corn maybe another 20 to 25 cents higher, and the beans another 40 to 50 cents higher on Friday's close had the Western Corn Belt missed the rains. And one of the reasons that is because east of the Mississippi, say Missouri, St. Louis, all the way to the Illinois-Indiana border, Evansville, Owensboro, Kentucky, talking to clients there, they're very slow and very delayed in planting right now because of cold and wet conditions. I actually heard for the first time this week some prevent plant talk by some of those farmers. So that would have been a real issue had you missed your rains and we had missed our rains here in the Western Corn Belt.
Yeah, it's really interesting. A week ago, I heard from a farmer in southwest Nebraska who was looking at prevent plant because it was so dry. But fortunately, they've picked up some rain, so I think they're able to get some seed in the ground at this point. Just in terms of what are we going to be watching in the week to come? Anything on your radar that folks should be looking for?
Yeah, the past 3 weeks or so, I've been talking to clients and subscribers about pushing the button on hedging some soybeans and hedging some cattle. Really nothing's changed. And in fact, with the rallies we've seen in both, I think we're in a good position, and seasonally we're in a good position to start executing that. And after this week's cattle on feed report, I didn't see anything in that cattle on feed report that would make me want to come off of the idea of if we went higher next week on weather and beans and went higher on the cattle on feed post report, post holiday trade, I'd be willing to get some hedges in place by next Friday.
And speaking of that cattle on feed report, let's send it on now over to Alex Makovicka for a little more on the livestock side of things and how that cattle on feed report is impacting things.
Important to get some cattle on feed insights. Kyle Bumsted, a livestock analyst, is joining us. Kyle, you look at this cattle on feed report released Friday just after the close. Tell us the numbers. What was sticking out to you? Did it live up to the expectations?
Well, expectations came in right in line with expectations in all three categories. The on-feed number was estimated 98.5%, came in right at 98.5%. Placement number was estimated 97.4, came right in at, 97.1, came in at 97.4, right in the middle of expectations. And the marketing number, they were estimated 96.8, came in at 97.4, which some are going to construe as a little bit friendly. That was towards the upper end of expectations, but we have to keep in mind that Easter fell on kind of a different schedule this year. So I think if it weren't for the Easter holiday, that marketing number might be just a freckle lighter than what some folks are anticipating. Now, this is going to be for the October through December marketing period, and it looks to me like we're still going to have some lower numbers coming at us here as we move forward. But keep in mind, we do have heavy weights out there, so we're making up for some of it in tonnage. Now, there's nothing about steer heifer breakdown. That came in last month's report. That was as of April 1st. And if remember, that heifer number is 37.6%. So it did indicate just a little bit of heifer retention. And now with the rain that we're getting here across the central United States and southern plains, it wouldn't surprise me if we see the next steer and heifer breakdown report, which comes up here in July. We could see that heifer number maybe show a little bit more retention as well.
One follow-up question. There were some concerns around New World Corn potentially impacting these numbers. Is that something that you really saw come into play here? Were they important to watch? What did you see?
It is possible, but until I get a chance to really break down the state-by-state breakdown and look at where the placements actually were, I haven't really gotten a chance to look over that yet, as we're just a couple minutes after the report was released. So there is that possibility. So let's not rule that out. That border could still be shut down for a long period of time from the way it sounds here today. I did talk to some folks down that way that were scheduled to have some cattle come across, and they're not getting anything coming across yet. So it may be a little while before that border opens back up, Alex.
You've been watching the Nebraska Soybean Weekly Market Report. Mike Zuzolo joining us. quick parting thoughts on the week that was.
Still had a good demand week this week in the export sales, Steve, and that maybe suggests that the end user out there is getting nervous about the weather as well. Another key feature, I think, to the trade when we come back from the holiday.
Well, Mike, thanks so much for joining us. Also, thank you for Alex and Kyle for breaking down those cattle on feed numbers. That is this week's weekly market roundup. Reminder, commodity futures and options involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. This is the weekly market roundup brought to you by Nebraska Soybean Farmers and their checkoff.